Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 973B, and today's date is May 17th, 2016, and the title of the episode is Clock is Ticking Down, U.S. is Preparing the Middle East for Something Big. Let's get right into the economic collapse financial news. Now, we talk a lot about our government employees and how they really don't work for the people, how they're really working for themselves, how they work for foreign governments, they work for central banks, they work for corporations, everyone but the people. Well, there's a new book out there, and this is written by one of their own, and it's entitled The Confession of a Congressman X. And this is some of the things he had to say. He said, "Most of my colleagues are dishonest career politicians who revel in the power and special interest money that's lavished upon them. My main job is to keep my job, to get reelected. It takes precedence over everything. Fundraising is so time-consuming, I seldom read any bills I vote on. Like many of my colleagues, I don't know how the legislation will be implemented or what it will cost. The average man on the street actually thinks he influences how I vote. Unless it's a hot-button issue, his thoughts are generally meaningless. I politely listen, but I follow the money." And when you think about it, they don't need to tell us this. We see it. We see it every single day from every single bill that comes over their desk. We see that they don't read them. They don't care about them. They don't care if it's a benefit to the people. And when it's passed and it affects them, we see how they react. I mean, look at the Affordable Care Act. Whoa, wait a minute. I'm going to get this crappy insurance. Let's exempt ourselves. Let's exempt our staffers. And this is what they do time and time again. They work under different rules than what they're voting on. They vote on something, well, those are for the people. We have a different set of rules for ourselves. And this is not what our founding fathers envisioned. They didn't envision our representatives representing foreign governments, banks, corporations, and not the people. But that's what we have today. Now, the Belgian police, they are warning users not to use Facebook Reaction, the feature that is on Facebook, because they had that thumbs up like button. A lot of people were asking for a dislike button. Instead, they gave them reaction faces to display what your mood is like when you're looking at a certain post or something. And the Belgian police claim the site is using them as a way to collect information on people to target advertising toward them. And they're telling their people, listen, don't click on these things. They will track you. And they're setting up profiles to understand what your mood is on certain things. Now, this is all part of data collection, and we know that all this information is not going to be stuck in Facebook. We know this is going to be distributed to the government databases through the USA Freedom Act, because that allows the government to take data from corporations, and it will hold them immune. And when you really think about it, I mean, corporations, the government, they want all this information. They want to know what you're thinking. They want to know what your mood is. They want to know where you are at all times. They want to know your purchases. I mean, listen, the FBI, they planted mics in front of a courthouse to hear people's private conversations. And they've done this all around the country. They look at your email, they look at your texting, they try to look at everything. Now, can they look at everyone at the same time? No. They're looking at very specific groups. They're trying to correlate data to find out who is going to be a threat to their authority. That's what they're searching for. So they look for certain words, certain terms. But what we need to do is we need to protect ourselves at all costs. Make it harder for them. I mean, is it foolproof? Absolutely not. But we need to use some type of encryption email. You can use a product like blockatpocket.com. It's a sleeve. You can slip your phone into it. Blocks your signal. The material is intertwined with like metals, silver, copper. and it blocks the signal so you can't be tracked wherever you move and wherever you go. You can use it for your credit cards too, because it protects that little chip in there where people walk by and they read your data. This will block that signal. So there are many different ways that we can protect ourselves. I mean, is every method foolproof? No, but when you lump them all together, it makes it much harder for the government, because what we're saying to them is, listen, we have the right to privacy. We're backing up our rights. We're showing you we don't want to be spied on. That's the message that we're putting out there. And each time they do it, we say, well, listen, I tried to protect myself, but you're violating my Fourth Amendment. And this cannot happen because I'm exercising my right now. Now we see the CIA watchdog. They're supposed to be handling the torture reports, and by accident, they inadvertently deleted one of the copies of the Senate report on the torture techniques employed by the agency in wake of 9/11. Now, there are still other copies that exist, including the CIA. They have their reports. Of course, they're not going to hand them over. But news of the deletion is significant, as it occurred at the CIA Inspector General's office, which is in charge of overseeing policies and conduct at the agency to ensure that it is not breaking the law or acting out of bounds. Now, Senator Feinstein is now urging the CIA to give the inspector another copy. So far, the watchdog has yet to receive it, and we're still waiting to see what has happened here. Now, we all feel that things are changing in America with political correctness, with Obamacare, with Common Core, trying to teach our young that rights are really privileges, the government can take them away. And we're starting to see a lot of similarities and parallels between the United States and Nazi Germany. For instance, free stuff. The Nazis gave out lots and lots of free stuff. Kitty Weatherman was a child living in a peaceful life in Austria when Hitler took over her nation. And at that time, newlyweds immediately received a $1,000 loan from the government to establish a household. We had big programs for families, all-day care, education was free, high schools were taken over by the government, college tuition was subsidized, everyone was entitled to free handouts such as food stamps, clothing, and housing. Sounds very, very similar to the United States today. According to Kitty, once Nazis took control of Austria, our tax rates went up to 80% of our income, which choked the life out of the free market system. Well, we're seeing a lot of taxes now being implemented on the people, more taxes on the way, parallel to what happened back then. Back in Nazi Germany, there was a huge amount of government regulation. We see with the Obama administration that we have a lot of government regulation. Back during Nazi Germany, of course, we had the Gestapo, which was spying on the people. The Nazis wanted to know everything about everyone. Anyone that was deemed to be anti-government was dealt with immediately. And we're seeing the same thing today, where the government is out there spying on the people, looking for extremists, those people that don't agree with the government. So we see a lot of parallels today of what is going on. And we're heading down a path that doesn't look too good at this point. Now, South Korea, US, and Japan, they're going to stage a missile defense drill in June to practice detecting and tracking down North Korean missiles with the Aegis vessels. And they're going to be working together. And of course, this is all focused on North Korea right now. And we can see that this is the first joint South Korea, US, Japan missile defense exercise that we have seen. Now, of course, every time we see a drill, this is a dress rehearsal for war. This is what they're planning on. Now, the U.S. State Department, they have issued a strong-worded and unusually detailed travel warning for North Korea, telling people not to go there. Things are going to start to break down in North Korea. So it looks like the U.S. might have something planned in this area. Victoria Nuland, she's going to be visiting Russia to discuss the Ukraine crisis, which means we can expect something big to happen in Ukraine, because every time she visits a certain area and is involved, something occurs. We see that the Kiev government, they are bringing in military equipment to the contact line. They're concentrating a lot of their equipment up front, prepared and ready to go. And remember, Poroshenko at this point is not going to be talking to the Lugansk or Donetsk people until the OSCE police mission is established in these regions and they take control over the borders. So we're going to have to watch this situation very carefully. We see there are more drills, the Arctic Anvil drills. They're going to be taking place in Alaska for the first time this year, with soldiers arriving in early June and many remaining through August. Very interesting time period. The exercise will involve about 8,000 soldiers. We're going to see the first time the U.S. Army Pacific will use its Joint Pacific Multinational Readiness Capability, a new deployable training system of personnel and equipment outside of Hawaii. The drills, which will test U.S. Army Alaska's ability to receive and redeploy a large number of troops. Canada is going to be involved in this. A unit from the Canadian Army's 1st Canadian Mounted Brigade is also expected to participate in this exercise. We see that NATO is having another drill in Poland. 1,500 NATO servicemen will participate in the Very High Readiness Joint Task Force from May 17th to May 27th. The brilliant jump drills will bring together servicemen from Spain, the United Kingdom, and other countries. Of course, they're doing this because of Russian aggression. Now, out in Yemen, we see the Yemeni government, they have suspended talks, ceasefire talks, peace talks, for the second time this month. And they're saying that the Houthis must comply with the UN Security Resolution. They have to give up their territories. They have to allow the government back in. And if they're not going to do this, there's no reason to even talk to them. Well, the Houthis don't want to do this because they don't want the puppet government in their country. And also, Saudi Arabia invaded Yemen, and Saudi Arabia was never attacked. But nobody has a problem with this. So what we're seeing right now is that Saudi Arabia, the United States, they are shifting the narrative of the story in Yemen. Where once they said they're going after the Houthis, now they're going after Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State in Yemen. Now, the question is, why would they do this? Well, we've seen Saudi Arabia. They're making no headway. I mean, it's been 14 months, and they can't get anywhere. They're using a paid mercenary outfit to handle this, and it's not working out. So the U.S. is getting involved right now. And the only way they can get involved is to say that Al-Qaeda is in this area because they can use the legislation back in 2001 to bring in forces to fight Al-Qaeda. And this is why they're changing the narrative of the story, because the U.S. is saying, okay, we need to get into the country. We already know there's boots on the ground in Yemen. And this is how the U.S. gets into these countries. They use the narrative, the legislation, to get into the country, to bring troops in, to bring military assets, to try to restore the puppet government in these countries. And they're doing it in Yemen, they're doing it in Lebanon, they're doing it in Libya, they're doing it everywhere in Iraq, everywhere they possibly can, because they realize they need to restore the Middle East. They need to keep the petrodollar alive, or the entire system collapses. It's going to collapse anyhow. But in their minds, they do believe if they can get enough of these nations and prop up the system, they can keep it going for a little while longer. Now, out in Libya, we see rival factions. They have agreed in principle to have one oil organization in Libya, which means the rival factions didn't agree whatsoever, and the unity government is trying to make everyone believe that, yes, we all agreed on this. Well, the unity government is not even voted into power just yet. Now, the unity government, they want warplanes. They want helicopters. And we see that the United States, the U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry, said that they're going to be lifting the arms embargo and they're going to allow arms to flow into Libya. Why are they doing this? Well, we're getting word that they're getting prepared for this invasion. Now, we all thought that Italy was going to be leading this invasion. This is what was out there. These are the news stories, the reports that were coming out. But then we come to find out it's not Italy, but it's Nepal. And what we're seeing right now is that Nepal is expected to deploy several hundred of Nepalese troops. They are committed. They have up to 5,000 troops. They'll handle this UN operation. Italy is also going to be there with their 5,000 troops. We also know that Britain, France, the US are also going to be involved in this. So we can see things are really starting to shape up right now, getting prepared and ready. Now, Britain and France, they are pushing for a UN naval blockade of Libya. They want to block out any ship that is coming towards Libya. Now, this was done once before. They did it in Yemen when they started the bombing runs. They're now doing it in Libya. So they're following the same pattern. They're getting prepared. We see the U.S. is going to be sending troops, weapons to Libya. And all of this is now coming to a head where they're preparing and getting ready to go full steam ahead at this point. Now, out in Syria, we see both sides are trying to come up with a date for peace talks. And right now, they do not have a date. They couldn't agree on a date, so we're going to have to wait to see. And right now, the peace talks have broken down in Syria, and there's fighting all over the place. But what's very interesting out in Syria is Miguel Fernandez. He is the only journalist from Western world accredited to work in the Syrian capital of Damascus for nearly a year. And he went out to the Syrian people, and he asked about, how do you feel about Russia? How do you feel about the United States? And what he reported was that there are stark differences between the U.S. and Russia. Russia, they see them as a friend. They see they're there to fight terrorism. They're there to help the Syrian people. When they bomb, it's very precise. They hit the targets. They don't destroy the infrastructure. They don't kill the civilians. When they talk about the U.S., they're saying, well, the U.S. was never invited into the country. The U.S. is hitting a lot of Syrian infrastructure, killing a lot of innocent civilians. And since the U.S. has been there, the Islamic State and other terrorist groups has expanded their territory over the time they've been there. So what we're seeing right now is the people on the ground in Syria, they realize what the U.S. is doing. And we see at this point, this is not a grassroots uprising because the people were unhappy with their government. This is a paid mercenary regime change orchestrated by the United States government central bankers. And we continually get more and more evidence that, this is how it really is. Now, the Russian president's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, came out and said, listen, the Golan Heights does not belong to Israel. Because we know Netanyahu was out there, and he is saying that, yes, the Golan Heights will remain part of Israel. And, of course, under the UN, resolution number 497, that instructs Israel to leave the area. It is not part of Israel. It's always been a part of Syria. And just because you occupy it right now doesn't mean it's still part of Israel. And Russia's saying, listen, you can't have this. It will be returning back to Syria. And we're going to have to watch that situation very carefully. Now, since we had the introduction of Al-Qaeda in Syria, this is making for a complicated peace process. And of course, this is exactly what the U.S. government central bankers wanted. They didn't want peace in this area. They didn't want ceasefire. And they needed to push this a step further. Now, remember, under 2001 legislation, the United States government central bankers are allowed to go into any country where there is Al-Qaeda. So now they have Al-Qaeda as the lead terrorist group, which is the proxy arm of the United States government central bankers. And they are using that to create additional chaos in the region. Now, White House spokesman Josh Earnest said on Monday that President Obama was pleased with his administration policies on Syria. And he also acknowledged that the country now poses a heightened risk to America and its interests. Well, we know what that means. They couldn't get into Syria. They can't get the oil, they can't set up a central bank, and they can't build the oil pipeline through Syria. That's what he means by that. And we've seen terrible violence in Syria. It's an awful humanitarian situation, and it's a genuine human tragedy. And it's a dangerous place, and it's a place that poses a heightened risk to the United States and our allies' interests around the world. And we're very worried about what could happen from this heightened risk. Now remember, since Obama's term, nearly 500,000 Syrians have died during this conflict. And what he's saying is that they need to get into Syria, because if they can't get into Syria, this is going to be a problem for the private Western Central Bank countries. And the humanitarian problem is caused by the United States. So what we're seeing right now is a huge buildup in Libya. We see a huge buildup in Syria. Turkey is on the edge right now. We know that Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the United States, they're planning for this northern army coming down from the north. We understand on May 19th there could be some type of false flag event in Turkey to kick this thing off. We're going to have to watch that very carefully. And Turkey says, listen, if we don't get cooperation from everyone else, we're going in by ourselves. So we can see war break out at a moment's notice. The Middle East right now is being set up for all-out war. And the U.S. is going into Yemen. The U.S. is going into Libya. U.S. is going into Lebanon. It's in Iraq. And we already have troops in Syria. You see what's going on here. Now, if we go back to our founding fathers, how did they look at war? Well, Thomas Jefferson declared the American way of interacting with the world to be peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. Commerce, through sanctions and embargoes, the U.S. government has carried out economic warfare against entire countries due to political disagreements with their leaders. This has resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocents who were denied the opportunity to buy goods and services from the U.S. and the rest of the world. It has also prohibited the ability of Americans to travel and trade freely. James Madison recognized the dire threat that war poses to a free society. Of all the enemies to public liberty, war is perhaps the most to be dreaded because it compromises and develops the germ of every other. War is the parent of armies. From these proceed debts and taxes, and armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for bringing the many under the domination of the few. He concluded by saying, no nation could preserve its freedom in the midst of a continual warfare. It is the interest of every American to understand why war is so dangerous to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Taking a stand against war, and particularly against unconstitutional, unnecessary, unjust wars, is very much in keeping with what it actually means to be an American. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.